Amusement parks were built on a promise. Step through those gates, and the world outside disappears. The noise, the bills, the weight of ordinary life. All of it dissolves the moment you hear the music, smell the popcorn, feel the ground vibrating under the roller coaster track. They engineered it that way on purpose. Every detail designed to make you feel safe, to make you feel like nothing bad could happen here. But some of these places were hiding something. Not rumors, not urban legends. Real events, documented, litigated, settled behind closed doors, that the companies involved spent enormous amounts of money to make sure you'd never connect to their names. Parks that closed suddenly. Rides that disappeared overnight. Lawsuits that vanished from public records before they ever went to trial. This is a countdown of 11 American amusement parks that shut down after tragedies the industry tried to bury. And what you'll notice, as we move through this list, is that the accidents themselves aren't always the most disturbing part. What's disturbing is what happened after. The silence, the speed of demolition, the way whole places where thousands of people made memories, were erased from the map before the grief could solidify into accountability. Most people who grew up in the South remember Opryland as a good place. A Tennessee institution, a park built around live music and American nostalgia, right there on the banks of the Cumberland River. At its peak in the late 1980s, it drew over 2 million visitors a year. Families drove from 3 states away just to get there. It closed in 1997. The official reason was business strategy. The land was more valuable as a shopping mall. And that's true, as far as it goes. The Opry Mills Mall sits there now, and it does fine. But what gets left out of that story is the pattern of safety incidents that accumulated through the park's final decade. Ride malfunctions, guest injuries quietly settled, an internal culture, documented later in litigation, where maintenance concerns were flagged and then not acted on, not urgently anyway. No single catastrophic event ended Opryland. It was the accumulation, the slow build-up of incidents that never quite crossed the threshold of public scandal, but that made the liability math increasingly uncomfortable for the ownership group. When the decision came to sell the land, it wasn't just about retail square footage. It was about walking away from a legal exposure that was only going to grow. The rides were auctioned off. The structures came down fast. Within 2 years, almost nothing was left. Just the mall and the Opry itself, and a silence where 2 million annual memories used to be made. If you grew up in the Northeast in the 1980s, you already know the name, Action Park. And you're already half smiling, half grimacing, because everybody who went there has a story. The rides were borderline insane, user-operated, poorly supervised, designed with a kind of carnival recklessness that would never pass inspection today. Between 1978 and 1996, at least 6 people died at Action Park. 6 confirmed deaths on record. Guests. Paying customers who drove up to Vernon, bought a ticket, and didn't come home. The park became a dark joke. Traction Park. Class Action Park. People laughed about it. And that laughter was, without question, one of the most effective pieces of reputation management in American amusement history. When a place becomes a punchline, it stops being a crime scene. The danger got rebranded as part of the experience. Thrill seekers bragged about scars. The park closed in 1996, briefly reopened under different ownership, closed again. The original ownership group, the Mulvihill family, had structured their liability through a network of insurance companies they effectively controlled themselves. When lawsuits came, the money was there. The settlements were quiet. The families signed NDAs. What's strange is how long it took for the full scope of the deaths to become public knowledge. Not because the information was hidden exactly, the death certificates were public record, but because no one aggregated it. No one connected the dots in print until years after the park was gone. By then, the brand had already calcified into nostalgia. 6 people. And the legacy is a comedy special. Silver Springs was one of Florida's oldest attractions, a natural spring so clear you could see 40 feet down to the riverbed. Glass-bottom boat tours started there in the 1870s. Wild Waters, the adjacent water park, opened in 1978 to capture the family market that Disney had ignited across the state.
In the late 1980s, a series of drowning incidents at Wild Waters triggered state investigations. Children. The youngest was 4 years old. The park's lifeguard protocols were found to be inadequate. Undertrained staff, insufficient ratios, equipment that wasn't maintained to the standards the park publicly claimed to meet.
The state fined the park. The park appealed. The appeals took years. During those years, the park remained open. When the fines were finally settled, the amounts were low enough that they barely registered as operating costs for a park of that size. Wild Waters eventually closed in 2016, decades later, when the state took over Silver Springs as a public park. By that point, the water park incidents had effectively disappeared from public consciousness. The 2016 closure was covered as a peaceful transition, a conservation story, a return of wild land to the state. Nobody mentioned the children. The spring is still there, still impossibly clear. The riverbed still visible 40 feet down. Here's a case that tells you something about how corporate time horizons work. Americana opened in 1929 as Coney Island, the Cincinnati version, not New York, and for decades, it was the heartbeat of summer in southern Ohio. Multi-generational, the kind of park where grandparents brought grandchildren to the same rides they'd ridden as kids. In 1971, the park was rebranded as Americana and expanded significantly. In 1980, a ride malfunction seriously injured multiple guests. The specific incident, a ride called the Screechin' Eagle, a wooden coaster with a documented maintenance history, resulted in lawsuits totaling over $1 million. For 1980, that was serious money. What happened next is the part worth paying attention to. The parent company, Taft Broadcasting, didn't close the park. They accelerated their exit from the amusement business. Within 2 years, they had sold off or shut down nearly every park in their portfolio. Americana limped along under new ownership, never quite recovered financially, and finally closed permanently in 2002. The Screechin' Eagle still stands on that land, rotting. The new owner, a Christian retreat and campground, has left the coaster structure in place, too expensive to demolish, too unstable to ride. Locals know it's there. Most people driving past have no idea what they're looking at. A wooden skeleton at the edge of a religious camp, holding a story nobody tells anymore. Some parks don't even get the dignity of a Wikipedia page. Exhilarama operated in Memphis through the early 1990s as an indoor amusement facility. Go-karts, arcade games, a handful of small rides. It was the kind of place that thrived in strip mall America, the kind of place you went on a Tuesday night because there was nothing else open. In 1993, a go-kart accident left a child with a permanent spinal injury. The family sued. The facility's insurance situation turned out to be, and this is putting it generously, complicated. Multiple policies, exclusions buried in the fine print, a corporate structure designed to insulate the ownership from direct liability. The park closed. The lawsuit dragged on. The family eventually received a settlement that covered roughly a fraction of the lifetime care costs they were facing. The ownership group reorganized under a new entity and opened a different entertainment venue 2 counties over within 18 months. What happened to the family in Memphis isn't publicly documented. The settlement came with a confidentiality clause. The child would be in their early 30s now. That's all we know. California had several Waterworld parks, a regional chain that competed with the bigger Six Flags properties throughout the 1990s. The Concord location was one of the busiest, drawing summer crowds from the entire Bay Area inland corridor. In 1999, a teenage girl was seriously injured on a water slide, a slide that internal maintenance logs, revealed later in litigation, showed had been flagged for inspection multiple times over the preceding summer. The inspection hadn't happened. The slide was one of the park's highest traffic attractions. The park's parent company at the time moved quickly and quietly. They removed the slide within days of the incident. They issued no press release, no public acknowledgement. The injury was not reported in any Bay Area newspaper. a fact that, in retrospect, is almost more remarkable than the injury itself. The family sued. The case settled in 2001. Amount undisclosed. Conditions undisclosed. The park itself closed in 2008, absorbed into a larger regional closure. The Concord site was developed into retail, but for anyone who went to that park in the years after 1999, they walked past the gap where that slide used to be without knowing what had filled it. Celebration Station was a mid-tier family entertainment chain, go-karts, mini-golf, arcade, batting cages that operated across the Sunbelt in the 1990s and 2000s. Nothing remarkable about it on the surface. Just another franchise trying to capture the suburban family dollar. Between 1998 and 2004, at least 4 serious go-kart accidents across different Celebration Station locations resulted in lawsuits. 2 of those cases involved children who suffered injuries significant enough to require extended hospitalization. The cases were resolved individually, in separate jurisdictions, under separate confidentiality terms. What made this pattern notable, and what a Texas attorney who worked on one of those cases tried, unsuccessfully, to argue in court, was that the accidents weren't isolated. The go-kart equipment used across Celebration Station franchises came from the same supplier. The maintenance protocols were set by the same corporate franchisor. The injuries followed eerily similar patterns. The class action that might have made this visible never materialized. The cases stayed separate. The chain quietly sold off its locations through the late 2000s. The brand dissolved without ever appearing in a national headline. There's something almost architecturally precise about how it happened. 4 injured children, 4 sealed files, one company that just stopped existing. Kentucky Kingdom is still partially open today, so this one requires some precision. In 2004, a 16-year-old girl named Caitlin Lassiter was on the Superman Tower of Power, a freefall drop ride, when the ride malfunctioned. The ride's cable snapped and severed both of her feet. She survived, and she spent years publicly trying to get Six Flags, the operator at the time, to take accountability. Six Flags did not take accountability, not publicly, not clearly, not in the way Caitlin and her family needed them to. What followed was a legal and corporate saga that stretched across nearly a decade. Six Flags went bankrupt in 2009, not directly because of this incident, but the timing is notable. The Louisville Park closed. It reopened under new ownership in 2014. The Superman ride was gone. The spot where it stood was just lawn. No marker, no acknowledgement. Families walk past it today without knowing. Caitlin Lassiter gave interviews. She spoke publicly. She refused to sign away her right to speak, which is notable in itself. Most settlements in cases like this require silence as a condition of payment. She is still alive. She still talks about what happened if you look for it. But the ride is gone, the company restructured, and the park moves forward with new branding. The lawn is green. Astroworld deserves more time than a single entry in a countdown. It was a genuine cultural institution. Six Flags. Astroworld, opening in 1968, was the crown jewel of Houston's leisure landscape for more than 3 decades. When Houston had a good summer, Astroworld was part of what that meant. Travis Scott named an album after it. The nostalgia is real. It closed in 2005. Six Flags cited economics. The land was valuable. The park wasn't performing well enough to justify the real estate cost. And again, that's true as far as it goes. What gets glossed over? The park's final years were marked by a pattern of safety citations from Texas regulators, an aging infrastructure that had received declining maintenance investment, and ride incidents that generated local news coverage without ever reaching national attention. The decision to close wasn't purely economic. It was also about walking away from a liability profile that was trending in the wrong direction. The site sat empty for years, just cleared land in the middle of Houston, across from the Astrodome, grass growing over the footprints of roller coasters. Locals who remembered Astroworld could orient themselves by the absence. The coaster used to go right there, the ghost geography of a city landmark, and then in November 2021, the name resurfaced. Not the park, a music festival. Travis Scott's Astroworld Festival, on the same land, invoking the same memory. 10 people died in the crowd crush that night. The name came back. So did the silence about accountability. Different company, different event, same pattern of deflection, safety concerns raised in advance, settled out of court, corporate statements that said everything and admitted nothing. Some places carry a weight that doesn't go away just because you clear the land. We returned to Action Park, but for a specific reason. Because within all the dark comedy of that park's history, there is one story that deserves to be separated from the laughter. George Larson Jr. was 18 years old. In 1984, he drowned in the wave pool at Action Park. He was not alone. The wave pool was one of the most dangerous attractions in the park's history, a machine that generated waves powerful enough to exhaust swimmers who got caught in the wrong position. Lifeguards pulled guests out constantly. The park's own employees nicknamed the pool the Grave Pool among themselves. George drowned. He was 18. His family sued. The lawsuit was settled. The pool remained open. Action Park continued operating for another 12 years after his death, welcoming millions of guests. Here's what I want you to sit with. The park's own employees had a name for that pool. They called it a grave. They said it out loud to each other while children swam in it every day. And the park stayed open because the liability math worked, because the settlements were cheaper than the tickets sold. George Larson Jr. was 18 years old. That's a real person. That's somebody's kid. And Action Park became a brand, a t-shirt, a Netflix documentary, a memory people smile about. Most of you have never heard of this. That's not an accident. On the night of May 11th, 1984, a fire broke out in a walk-through haunted house attraction called The Haunted Castle on the grounds of Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey. The structure was a maze of foam and plywood, built with essentially no fire suppression system, no proper emergency exits, and flammable insulation running throughout the walls and ceiling. 8 teenagers died. 8. They were between 14 and 18 years old. Some were on school trips. They were inside a maze in the dark when the fire started, and they couldn't find their way out in time. The investigation that followed was one of the most damning safety evaluations in American amusement park history. The structure had never met fire codes, not when it was built, not when it was inspected, not when it was operating with guests inside it. The foam used for insulation was acutely flammable. There was one known exit and no clear path to it in the dark. 6 Flags settled with the victims' families. The amounts were sealed. The haunted castle was demolished, not slowly, not over months, but within days of the fire. Before investigators had finished their work, before the grief had finished its first wave. The New Jersey Attorney General at the time called the speed of the demolition troubling. The evidence it might have preserved was gone. 6 Flags. Great Adventure is still open. It's one of the highest attended parks in the country. You can go there this summer, and when you walk the grounds, past the roller coasters, past the food stands, past the families taking pictures, there is no marker, no memorial, no acknowledgement that 8 teenagers died in that spot in 1984. Nothing. Just grass. Just the park moving forward as it always has, as the industry always does. 8 kids. A maze in the dark. A fire that was allowed to happen because the cost of compliance was higher than the cost of the settlement. That's the architecture of forgetting. Not a single act of erasure, but 100 small decisions. To not install sprinklers. To not mark exits. To demolish before dawn. To seal the files. To keep the tickets selling. So here's what you're left with after watching something like this. You don't leave thinking about rides or coasters or water slides. You leave thinking about the distance between what these places promised and what they actually were. Joy as a product, safety as a calculation. And the strangest thing is, most of these parks still live in memory as good places. Family places. People who went to Action Park or Astroworld or Great Adventure carry real warmth for those summers. That warmth is genuine. It belongs to them. Nobody can take it. But underneath it, in the parts nobody talks about, there are files that were sealed. There are settlements that came with silence attached. There are names that should be said out loud, and almost never are. George Larson Jr. was 18. The 8 kids at Great Adventure were between 14 and 18. That's where the countdown ends. Not with a roller coaster. With a name. With the stubborn, irreducible fact of a person who was there, and then wasn't, in a place that was designed to make you forget that anything like that could ever happen.